Hello there, this is Dan, and you're about to listen to an extract from an episode of the Lee Cushing Podcast. Unfortunately, our homepage at noisybark.com is no longer online, but we hope to have a new homepage set up soon. Watch for updates on Facebook and Twitter under @LeeCushingPod. In the meantime, stick with our home on YouTube, Ambidextrous Solutions Limited, to hear more extracts like this one. The presenters are Howard and myself, and the music is by Greg Hume. Alright, so welcome folks to the Lee Cushing Podcast's discussion of the Star Wars saga, and it's going to be a discussion with special guests. I would like our first special guest to introduce himself.
Hi, my name's Sean Mason. I'm a massive Star Wars nerd, actor, improviser, geek, dispenser of opinions.
And lovely man.
Yeah, he's very nice.
Yeah.
Yes.
Of course, the listeners know, hopefully by now the listeners know me and Howard.
Hello.
And also, we have another special guest, which is my friend Tim. Unfortunately, he couldn't be here in person, so I've paid Guy Henry to imitate his voice and CG'd his face, so he looks a bit like Tim. So, Guy Henry playing Tim, can you please introduce yourself?
Hello, I'm Dan's friend Tim, and I'm a filmmaker. And I've always loved Peter Cushing and Christopher Lee, and I have to admit, I knew about Peter Cushing and Christopher Lee and loved them dearly before I knew about Star Wars.
Nice. So that's our first question. Sean obviously has explained that you're a Star Wars nerd, so I guess you knew about Star Wars before you really knew who Cushing or Lee were.
Well, certainly for Peter Cushing, I mean, my first Star Wars was the special editions 20 years ago in 1997, so...
Great days.
Yes, they were.
To an extent.
Which I think is possibly why I've been so generous in my opinions of later Star Wars films, because my first Star Wars wasn't the so-called pure Star Wars. I came to it 20 years too late, but I was only 10 years old, so I probably had seen Peter Cushing in something but didn't know it was Peter Cushing until A New Hope. Whereas by the time we got round to Attack of the Clones, I'd have seen The Wicker Man. Probably shouldn't have, because I was probably still too young to comprehend what I'd seen. But I was certainly more aware of Christopher Lee by that point.
I remember the early 2000s, because that was the point when I didn't have to explain who Christopher Lee was to anyone by saying, he's that guy from Gremlins 2, The New Batch.
Well, he'd had a bit of a career resurgence at that point as well. There'd been...
Because of The Lord of the Rings.
The Lord of the Rings, which is, if not... Two Towers came out the same year as Attack of the Clones. And then he'd been cameoing in Tim Burton films at that point.
And continued to do so for a while. God bless him. So how about you, Howard?
Well, when I first saw Star Wars in 1977, I didn't know who anybody was. I didn't know actors' names. I was just about 6 years old, so I just didn't... They were just people on the screen. My interest in Peter Cushing and Christopher Lee came later on when I got into horror films. I think The Ghoul was the first film I ever saw Peter Cushing in.
Wow.
I should have been watching it, but, we did. I might have seen him as Doctor Who by then, I don't know, but I certainly remember him in The Ghoul. So, but yeah, for Star Wars, no, I didn't know. I probably recognised him, but I didn't know who he was or who any of them were.
I came really late to Star Wars, and I was already a Doctor Who fan, so I'd seen Peter Cushing as Doctor Who. I think I'd already seen him as Sherlock Holmes as well. Yeah. And I didn't even know that he was in Star Wars. I remember picking up Alan Dean Foster's novelisation of Star Wars in my school library and seeing a photo of Peter Cushing and thinking, I don't want to see him playing a villain.
Which is interesting, because it was my first meeting with Peter Cushing, I suppose. First encounter is the word I was looking for. I was always surprised to find actually no, he generally played good guys.
Yeah.
And I think he just does it so well, and clearly is having such a ball with Star Wars, unlike other Fesps. In the film.
And I think you can see in the behind the scenes footage that he's just kind of loving being there, and everybody else was loving having him there.
Well, I think it's that. I think the difference between Peter Cushing and say Alec Guinness in Star Wars. One, Peter Cushing did not have to go to the shoot in Tunisia, which was, by all accounts, a terrible time. But also, because Cushing had done so much genre stuff, I think had a love for genre, and I believe was really just excited to have a whole new audience discover his work off the back of Star Wars. Because that was with Star Wars. No one knew who anyone was. It made so many names and so many careers. And even the people who had been working for a long time, they were suddenly on this huge global stage that they might not necessarily have been before.
Yeah.
I think that's true. I mean, because I was 7 years old, whatever. I knew who Kenny Baker was and Peter Mayhew.
Yeah.
These names were so familiar because they were interviewed all the time and the posters and everything. I didn't know who the hell they were, I didn't see them in anything else, but I knew who Anthony Daniels, these names were so kind of ubiquitous that you just knew them. You just knew who these first actors, I knew who they were, so.
Yeah.
I've been a big fan of Kenny Baker's ever since.
So, my second question to each of us is, what do you first think of when you hear the name Star Wars? And I'll give Tim the first go at this.
When I think of Star Wars, I think of John Williams' iconic main theme. I think of that swelling fanfare, and I think of the opening credit crawl.
Good answer. How about you, Sean?
I actually think of the ending of the first Star Wars film. Like I said, I first saw it in the Northwich Regal, 1997, Star Wars New Hope Special Edition, and maybe this is a rose-tinted memory, but all I can remember is that cinema being absolutely full of fathers and sons, which is very apt for this series. And when the Death Star blew up, I remember many of the dads going, "Yeah!" And I'd never seen that reaction from a British audience.
Wow.
It's very common, particularly in America, for cinema audiences to get that involved, but I'd never seen that with a British audience. And that was, I didn't word it like this because I was 10, but it was my first kind of realisation of cinema as an event. It's something you go to see and experience as a big group and to take part in these massive stories. And I remember watching Revenge of the Sith, same cinema. As far as we were concerned, it was going to be the last Star Wars film that we would see on the big screen. And the manager of the cinema had to walk in and say, "Will all of the Jedis and the Sith please sit down? The film is about to begin," because a lot of people, opening day, had turned up in costumes, were just having a big lightsaber fight in front of the cinema. And it was amazing. And it's something that makes them so universal and so exciting.
Lovely. How about you, Howard?
I think of that opening shot, which would be the first scene. Yes, I think of the music, the fanfare, and the introductory crawl and everything. But the first scene I would ever see in the cinema would be the little spaceship going past, and then this enormous spaceship just coming from the top of the screen, and which in a way is a bit like Star Wars itself. The way just Star Wars kind of took over the world and just filled the world in 1977. It was so. If you weren't around then, you don't. Even now, I don't think people know how big it was, because there was nothing like it before. Now, when a big film comes out, there've been other big films before it, so we kind of know what to expect. This took everybody by surprise, and it was just incredible, and we all loved it. Everybody, even the lads at school who played football liked Star Wars, because it just kind of it was kind of inclusive, sort of like it wasn't a complicated science fiction story. It was a very simple story that everybody could understand, and so everybody enjoyed it. So, but I just think of that opening shot with the two spaceships.
And again, the music, which
the music certainly.
So, but in that shot, it's so powerful. For me, I think mainly of lightsabers. I think the whole because I came to it quite late. the whole thing is a little bit mashed up with other things for me. Like when the Star Wars special editions came out, I made sure I went to see the first one, not because of it being Star Wars, but because I thought this was probably my last chance to see Peter Cushing on the big screen. Little did I know that 4 years later I'd be at university watching loads of Hammer films and stuff. But but there's something so primal about the lightsaber. It's such an iconic thing, and certainly whenever a new Star Wars film came out, for good or ill, the prequels. Looking back on them, I think they were probably terrible. Some people even said they were at the time. I always enjoyed them, and I remember distinctly after certainly the first two, not being able to function for the next 48 hours without going at things. I was walking around a shift. I was on a night shift at a nursing home the day that I saw Attack of the Clones, and I was walking around the corridors in the middle of the night fighting imaginary droids and things. And it's ridiculous because I was like 22 or 3 or something. But
well, you said I'm 29 now, and I I bought a lightsaber last week because why not? And I was really excited. I found on eBay the 1997 Power of the Force Han Solo blaster on eBay for 15 quid, when normally it was 50. That was a very exciting day, and I'm such a nerd.
I think I think of the toys. I think of the figures, especially the action figures. I had a Death Star, which was just the most brilliant thing. Now it was just a lot of cardboard with pictures painted on it, but I played with that damn thing until it collapsed. And it was great, because you kind of thinking about Star Wars, you could recreate it. Yeah, you had the figures, and you could have your own adventures with it, and
and that kind of thing created a template for toys, and it shaped generations of childhoods. I mean, I was a bit late to it, as I say, but I remember loving having a set of toys based on Manta Force, which is basically a very similar Star Wars thing. There's a whole kind of sci-fi universe in there that you could play around with, and I think it all came from Star Wars, that kind of stuff. The aesthetic as well, the design of spaceships and characters. Before we go on to the next question, I'm just going to drop in a comment which I'll probably edit to earlier. When you were talking about Cushing kind of connecting with a new audience. Well, this was 1977, for those of you who aren't sure when this movie came out. And this was 20 years after Cushing's breakthrough in The Curse of Frankenstein. And certainly Jonathan Rigby says in his book that Cushing was very conscious of exactly 20 years later appearing in another movie that basically changed the genre and changed cinema in a way. And he was really hoping and looking forward to the possibility that he would go on to make lots more movies like that. He didn't.
No, bless him.
Well, it's a shame really that Tarkin dies. Spoilers. I know you've had, you've had 40 years to watch it. But it's a shame that he dies, because, and I think we'll get onto this later, but there's no other Imperial officer that has the same effect or standing.
No, there's not.
Even in Rogue One.
Interesting point. Okay, so
I would agree with that.
I'll move on to the next question. So the next question is, what was the first Star Wars film you saw, and how did you see it? So again, I'll let Tim take the floor first.
The first Star Wars film I saw was actually Return of the Jedi. I believe I saw it it must have been Christmas 1989, and it was on TV. I believe it was the ITV premiere of the film.
Well, Sean, you've kind of already answered this question.
Yeah, and like I was saying, just from opening shot to the last shot, I was just in silence, just in awe of this whole film and everything and everyone in it. Yeah.
Wow. Howard?
Well, the first Star Wars film I saw was called Star Wars. We didn't mess around with. Later on, it was called The New Hope or something. And it was my first visit to the cinema, which was so exciting, Shrewsbury, and I think December 1977 or early 78, I don't know, but it was just so exciting. I think when you love a film like this, it's as much to do with the circumstances of how you saw it and who you saw it with and when you saw it and everything, as the film itself, although it is a great film. And for that to be the first film I ever saw in cinema, it was so exciting. If the first film I'd ever seen was Warlords of Atlantis, I might have a different attitude. But the first film I saw in the cinema was Star Wars.
It's a great
which was
first film.
Yeah, it's one of the first film. And then 20 years later, when the special edition came out, and I was very lucky enough to be going out with a girl called Helen, and she'd never seen Star Wars in the cinema, so I said, "You've got to go and see it." So I went to Huyton in Liverpool, where she lived, and this was the special edition. And I think I sat there all the way through going, well, that wasn't in the original, you know, and that wasn't in the original, and no, they didn't do that, and no, that's been added. She dumped me a few weeks later, but no, she didn't.
Oh my God!
No, she didn't. No, but I was doing that because I had such strong memories of the original, and I just thought, it doesn't need all this extra. I don't think a few more stormtroopers on the Death Star, a few more creatures in Mos Eisley. I don't think it needs that. I think that's just tinkering with it. I just think it was perfect as it was, and I think that was the first indication that George Lucas was becoming a little bit intoxicated by the new technology, by CGI, and which led on to The Phantom Menace.
Potentially with A New Hope. I mean, there's a lot of the changes in A New Hope don't necessarily hold up today. Largely the stuff that's on Tatooine, and that's, I think, largely down to the CGI. But I think the X-Wing battle at the end and some of the Death Star stuff is great. I think the best additions that were made in the special editions were the changes that were made to Empire. With the one per attack and expanding
Lots of people
Cloud
said that,
City, and I think that's the one that most benefited from the changes.
And even Gary Kurtz, who was the producer of the first two films and had nothing to do with the later ones or the special editions, said that he approved of the stuff they did to Empire, but the rest of it was a bit kind of crazy, in his opinion, that they felt the need to do that. My first encounters with Star Wars was a bit kind of piecemeal. The first one I ever saw in about 1986 when I was at primary school, and we had one of those nice Friday afternoons where lessons are called off and they put a movie on the very small TV in the corner of the assembly hall. And Mr. Saul, our headmaster, introduced it by saying, "I think you're going to like this. It's quite an old film, but you'll find it quite exciting, I'm sure." And it came on, and it was The Empire Strikes Back in pan and scan VHS, which is obviously the worst film to introduce the concept of Star Wars, especially to a child.
And certainly in pan and scan, that is
on a tiny TV.
That is tantamount to abuse.
So I mainly remember the Battle of Hoth and thinking things were cool, but not having any real idea what was going on. Later on, obviously now and again, Star Wars films would be on the TV in the 80s, but I would always miss them somehow. And I do remember one of them was on over Christmas, and I must have seen a trailer for what I thought was the film. I thought it was a trailer for the film, but I think it was probably actually a trailer for everything that ITV was showing over Christmas. And so it cut like bits of the Star Wars film together with bits of things that might have been like Brideshead Revisited and various other. So I'm sure I saw Luke flying an X-Wing over a country house, and I then thought that must have been how Star Wars began, like it started on Earth. But I never saw. It wasn't for like another decade. I went to America on holiday with my sister, my good old sister Maureen, who we keep mentioning on this podcast, and she listens to it. So hello, Maureen. In '95, and it was at the exact point when they were re-releasing the original trilogy on VHS in its unmessed with form, and they were actually saying it will never be available again, so you must buy it. And we were in America, the advertising for that was everywhere. So I thought, it's about time I watched this. So as soon as I got back to Britain, I got all of the 3 movies out of the library and watched them all in one night in a 6-hour sitting, and had a great time. And then made my own fake VHS box for it with my own artwork on the front cover, and just as an appendum, that's not even a word. No. Just as an addendum to what you guys were saying, it wasn't too long after that the special editions came out, and although I know which bits have been added, I can't really remember what they looked like before they were changed. So the special editions have kind of overwritten the originals in my memory. I have no idea what the battle at the end used to look like.
Well, see, I very definitely remember.
Less X-Wings.
Yeah.
I remember that the Death Star blowing up didn't used to look like the Klingon planet blowing up in Star Trek 6. That was the main. even at the time, that was clear. But
Well, the main thing was the inclusion of a scene they cut out where Han Solo was talking to Jabba the Hutt,
no, I know about that. Yeah.
which originally in the original was just an actor
Yeah.
called Declan Mulholland.
It was Declan Mulholland, yeah.
A big burly Irish actor who looks fairly alien, even without makeup on. And they cut that out because it was kind of just repeated what the Greedo scene had done. And then so they put that back in, only they superimposed the new Jabba the Hutt over. And I suppose, I can see that. I can see sort of like why they did that. I just thought the rest of it, because the original is so definite in my mind that anything's added to it stands out more than perhaps it would for other people.
And it was fine. And now that we're...
But I enjoyed it because it was a very...
I think it's
happy
strange
time.
that Disney have recently said they still wouldn't release the original version of it, like a restored original cut. And I do think that now that they're making...
I feel like that was part of the deal.
Yeah.
When they got Lucasfilm, that was part of the deal, was they weren't able to do that.
Sure. Yeah, that's probably true. Obviously, it's something George Lucas felt strongly about. But yeah, they're making new movies which go out of their way to look and feel like movies made in the 70s, essentially. But they're not releasing the original films the way they were.
Well, they also can't, because what was always nice about Star Wars was everything in the expanded universe counted, even when it didn't. And now they're trying to have a much more confined and concise and controlled canon. So if they release two versions of the same film, I think that's just going to confuse that. That's my artistic argument for it anyway.
I can see that point of view. Okay, so we'll move on to the next question. So, do you think you would like Star Wars or any of the sequels or prequels less if they didn't feature Cushing or Lee? If so, what do you think was special about their contribution to the films? And again, I'll let Tim take the lead.
Moff Tarkin is my favourite character in all of the Star Wars films, and he's certainly my favourite villain. So, I mean, the first Star Wars film is definitely my favourite, the 1977 one. And one of the things that I love about the film is that it's all before Star Wars became this massive pop cultural phenomenon, and there isn't a huge reverence for the Force and Darth Vader. Nothing's sort of iconic in it. And you really feel that when they made it, Cushing and Alec Guinness were the two big stars that were in it. And there was nobody for anybody else to impress upon in the film. And I think when you watch that scene, that amazing scene in I think it's a boardroom with a big round table, and Cushing comes in and sits down. If you look on YouTube, there's a camera angle from just one camera angle of that scene. And you just see it all played out. And what you can see is that Cushing is just held in such high regard by all these other kind of jobbing, kind of speaking actors who are around the table, and they're looking up to him like he's some kind of god. And I love that the film was made in Elstree at that time in the mid-70s. And Dan's probably mentioned this in podcasts previously, but Hammer Horror used to be based at Bray Studios during kind of the 50s and 60s, and then when it came to the 70s, they moved to Boreham Wood to Elstree Studios. And I really like that they came to, Star Wars came to Elstree, and at that point, I don't think it was even functioning as a studio. They'd closed it, and they took this kind of iconic celebrity of Boreham Wood and made him the kind of star, one of the stars, along with Guinness, of this sci-fi film. And and as I say, in this round table sequence, you can see just everybody's just looking at Cushing in adoration, and he's the glue that holds it together. You just see what a professional he is too, and he was kind of, pre Brando, I guess, pre Method as well. His acting style, it kind of lent itself roots of the English theatre. And he has this gentlemanly like quality, and I'm a huge fan of his performance as Moff Tarkin, and as I say, I love that in the first film, the actual character of Tarkin, he doesn't have any regard for the Force or even Vader. You know, he's just kind of seen as a glorified henchman, and I love that view of it. I love that you can go back to that film, whereas with, you know, even like all the following films, Vader has his own big, you know, musical John Williams march when he enters the room. Everyone kind of bows before him. He's big, you know, and we've got the prequels as well that actually tells his backstory. So it's all kind of become about him. And I like in that first 1977 one, the villain really is Cushing. He completely owns that film. Cushing's Tarkin. He is the principal bad guy. And he's a pantomime villain, and he's brilliant, and it feels very self-contained when you watch it too. It doesn't have this sense of a kind of bigger world, and I like his viewpoint. I love that. I go back to that Roundtable scene. I love it when he's sat around it, and Darth Vader starts to use his grasp of the Force on that guy's throat. And that actor, by the way, is I believe is the actor Sarah Douglas's husband. Well, was at the time her husband. And anyway, he's using this grasp of the Force and to block this guy's throat. And he says this bickering is pointless, and he kind of moves it along, and it's just seen as he just trivializes this banter, and he sees the Force as kind of an extension to that. He sees it as a glorified party trick. It's nothing that can do anything. And of course, in the film later on, that's the whole, that helps Luke. When he turns off his targeting device, he uses the Force to destroy Cushing, and it's brilliant. It's really, really well done. But it really gives you a sense that he's just this guy with this big Death Star, and he's into sort of this fascist bureaucracy, and I love his performance, and I love that character. And I loved the scene too with right at the end when the Death Star is about to explode. One of my favourite moments in the trilogy, and I'd say actually probably my favourite performance in all of those films, is what I believe is not an outtake, but it was a bit of film from when they were doing the clapperboard at the beginning of the shot of this kind of mid shot of Cushing, and he's got his hand across his face, and he looks like he's thinking about what's coming, and you're kind of reading his mind, thinking, he just realizes that the rebellion might just have a chance. And then we cut to that shot of the Death Star blowing up, and it's fantastic. It's just a great moment. And apparently it's just this bit where they needed the shot of a close up of him, and they got it. And it's not of him performing; it's of him getting ready to remember his lines. And I think that's that lends it so much. So yeah, no, I'm a huge fan of Peter Cushing. One of the other things that I really like about him is his influence on Carrie Fisher, and she's spoken of how she loved Peter Cushing, and she found him this soft gentleman, and she found it problematic that she didn't find him terrifying at all as a villain on screen, and acting next to him, because he was just such a lovely gentleman. And you can hear in her diction too, she has this kind of English rose, princess thing going on, where the way she talks like this across all of the films, and she doesn't do that in The Force Awakens. And I like to think that that was his shadow across those films. Curiously enough too, on Supergirl, the film that was also shot in Britain not that long after Star Wars, they had Peter O'Toole as this Alec Guinness kind of character. And similarly, I've heard Helen Slater, who played Supergirl, who's American, saying how when she came over, she was very much influenced by him, and she very much liked his stage acting quality. This soft, gentlemanly like touch. So these really young American women seem to love that. And too, you can hear like Leia and Supergirl. They both have this kind of very delicate kind of English tone to their voice when they talk, and I think that's all sweet. I love how that feeds into all of the films. I think that's really, really, really nice. Count Dooku, I don't know those films, the prequels as well as I do. Certainly the 1977 Star Wars, but wasn't it a thrill to see him on the big screen in a Star Wars film, kind of spiritually linking Lee and Cushing into this other franchise. I remember seeing the film actually, the Attack of the Clones, with Dan, or did I? I'm not sure if we saw that together or if we saw the one afterwards. But I just remember us being sort of mutually thrilled at the notion of those two being in it, and that was very nice.
I don't know if I'd like the films less, honestly, but they would certainly not be as good at the same time. Particularly, I think what's really great about certainly Cushing in Star Wars is he has this gravitas and this charm and this very cold kind of exterior, but you can see lots of things going on. And he is the only Imperial officer, really, in the whole series who can actually keep Vader on a leash.
Sure.
No one else can do that. And, for the other two films in that trilogy, everyone else is in fear or awe of Darth Vader.
Yeah.
Tarkin is the only one who isn't. And I think you needed an actor of Cushing's calibre and ability to kind of portray that, to be a human face of the Empire. And also, I think a testament, particularly to Cushing's performance, is how much interest that generated in wanting to know more about Tarkin. Tarkin has since had novels. He's been in the Star Wars Rebels series. I think he even cameoed in the Clone Wars. And, we want to know more about him, and we remember him because of, I think, what Cushing did that made him so menacing and so threatening. At the end of Revenge of the Sith, and you had the CGI shot where you just had the Death Star being built in the background, and this digital recreation of Tarkin, and it was just those cheekbones, and instantly identifiable. You knew who it was.
Oh yeah.
And that's very much, I think, down to Cushing. With Christopher Lee in Attack of the Clones, he adds gravitas to that film. It's a shame that he is in the worst Star Wars film. But he is in the best half of the worst Star Wars film. Like, half of Attack of the Clones is really good. The stuff with Obi-Wan following Jango Fett and the creation of the Clone Army is really good. People falling in love and complaining about sand is just tedious. But Christopher Lee, he, like, the scene when I've captured Obi-Wan and Count Dooku at that point is trying to turn Obi-Wan and say, look, Qui-Gon was your mentor, but I was his mentor, and he'd have seen things the way I do, and they were starting to play with those shades of grey. And I think they needed an actor like Christopher Lee, again, to present a character that you were never really quite sure if he was a villain or just a misunderstood good guy who had a point. And he did know that the Sith had infiltrated the Republic, and actually he was trying to do a good thing. Sure. And then they had that twist out, he is Darth Tyrannus. But because there's that mercurial quality that Christopher Lee has, that he is, you could completely buy that, oh, maybe he has a point, and completely buy, no, he's playing a game here, and he's a villain.
Because even when he plays heroes, he's kind of scary.
Yeah,
he has that authority. He was quite scary when he's being interviewed by Jonathan Ross. So you just, there's just a sense like you don't want to cross this man. And I think that moment in Attack of the Clones, which I've not seen in its original form since it came out, but I do remember that he has that line where he says to Obi-Wan, it may be difficult to secure your release.
Yeah,
and there's a wonderful play on of tension in that line, and me and my friend laughed our heads off because of how he kind of rode that line of irony.
Yeah,
in saying that line of dialogue. So, yeah, I think that movie is immeasurably better because he's in it. Even though there was a review in... Sorry, I've answered the question without giving you the chance, Howard. But, yeah, there was a review in Sight and Sound that said that he was great, although his character is differentiable only in wardrobe from... Saruman in The Lord of the Rings.
Same. I know it was the more or less the same time, but yeah, I'll rephrase my original answer. Star Wars is not necessarily better because of Cushing, but really uses him and great value from him. Whereas Attack of the Clones is certainly better from having Christopher Lee in it. And it's a shame, really. He's kind of wasted in Revenge of the Sith. Yeah. He has some moments. He has some great lines in the 2 or 3 minutes he's actually in the film. And that slight moment of terror when Palpatine tells Anakin to kill him, and he kind of looks off to the side.
Yeah, and it's like he knows that he's going to die, but I think he also knows he probably has to or something.
Yeah, it's the Sith way.
There's a very subtle realisation on his face that's very Christopher Lee. Anyway, Howard, I should let you answer this.
Well, no, I mean, with Star Wars, like I said, because when I first saw it, I didn't know who any of them were. I didn't know who Peter Cushing was, so I didn't have any preconceptions. With Star Wars, no, I don't think it would make any difference. With Peter, he gives a good performance and everything, but it's a kind of such a small part that he doesn't do a lot. I can think of other actors who perhaps could have played that part, not as well or not as but so. No, it doesn't really sort of make that much difference for me. I think it's Harrison Ford and Alec Guinness in Star Wars who are the key performances who make that film. And without them, it would have been, I think, a lesser film. But I agree with what you say about Christopher Lee. I mean, I'll have to watch Phantom Menace and Attack of the Clones again, because when I first saw them on the telly, I didn't see them in the cinema, I kind of went in with the attitude, even before I'd seen them, I thought, I'm not going to like these. They're not going to be as good as the old ones. So I was kind of... But my nephew was about 5 or 6 at the time. He loved them. He really enjoyed them. So I thought, well, it's not really... I'm just an old fart. It doesn't really matter what I think. If he's really enjoying them, then they're good films. Then they're doing their job and they're working. But I did see Attack of the Clones, and I thought, yeah, I think you're right. Christopher Lee does give it that gravity. He gives it a kind of humanity. He's like a human being amidst all the CGI and all the animation, and he's somebody you can sort of... I mean, he becomes such an iconic figure by then.
Yeah.
You know, and in the Lord of the Rings and everything, because he'd survived so long. Peter Cushing was dead, Vincent Price was dead, Donald Pleasence was dead, all those sort of fantasy icons were, and he was still around, so he was the one that was in all these things. And I just think he gives it a sort of somebody you can empathise with, and just you know, sort of like he gives it a certain grandeur. I think.
He really does. And I loved just. Again, I was at uni at the time, but the weirdness of walking around council estates in Sheffield and seeing blockbuster movie posters with Christopher Lee. You know, they did like character posters with just one character on each one, and there was one which was just Count Dooku with his little bendy lightsaber. Like, what the hell? Wow.
Why do you think the name Dooku is a bit... It reminds you of Count Duckula.
But it's in that long tradition of weird Star Wars names. And actually, I completely agree about... Christopher Lee brings something real to it, and which is why in Revenge of the Sith he does this forward flip for no reason to get off a balcony. Like, well, that was clearly not Christopher Lee, and I don't buy that. Christopher Lee also does get what I think is actually a cool moment. I know there's a lot of people that don't like it, but he gets to fight Yoda.
Yeah,
and that sequence. Was cool. That moment when Yoda
we saw that in
sparks
cinema,
up his lightsaber.
I was laughing my head off but enjoying it.
Yes.
I was kind of thinking, I'm not sure this is appropriate. This possibly violates the character of Yoda or something. It takes away some of the mysticism, but it's great fun. It's ridiculous, this little kind of muppet leaping around in the air and having a fight with a man who's 4 times his height and 80. They're both jumping around. And Yeah, no, I enjoyed that. For my take on that question, I would say that, I mean, clearly, because I was almost seeing Star Wars for Cushing, I would love it a bit less, but I agree with what you're both saying, that I don't think he makes the movie. It's not like if Star Wars existed without Peter Cushing in it, I wouldn't want to see it and I wouldn't love it as a film. I think I would. And in fact, I remember once I was watching it at home, and my mum, who's a massive Star Wars hater, she took her children...
Well, no one's perfect.
Well, indeed. She took her children, not including me at the time, I wasn't born yet, to the pictures in 1977 to see a double bill of Star Wars and Close Encounters, which is another film that she hates. And I think she just has that 4 hours enshrined in her memory as something. She was just like... At the end, when they were flying into the Death Star to blow it, I was just like, blow it up! But anyway, she was in the back of the room and I was watching Star Wars, and she'd obviously kind of suppressed most of the film from her memory, but she could hear Peter Cushing talking to all the characters, and she just went, "Who's that actor? Is that Roddy McDowall?" You know, and it could have been someone.
Well, yeah, Roddy McDowall could have done it. You know, in his way. You know, I can think of other actors who could have played Tarkin. I love Peter Cushing, and I'm glad he's in it, and he's really great. But I can think of other, because it's a fairly small part.
I mean, I don't know if I necessarily agree. I think Peter Cushing doesn't make Star Wars, but Peter Cushing makes the villain, and I think that's what's so great about it. And I certainly couldn't imagine anyone else in that role, and obviously they couldn't imagine anyone else in that role when they came along to do Rogue One.
Sure, well, yeah, clearly, which we'll come to. Yeah, I mean, I think other actors could have played that part, but very few would have had the kind of stature about them to make it convincing that they kind of could frighten Vader or could control Vader. I'm not sure Roddy McDowall could have done that.
Well, he could.
Okay. End of discussion.
He told me.
Well, that has been another episode.
I'm not saying Roddy McDowall.
And just very quickly, Christopher Lee also adds gravitas to the Clone Wars film, the kind of forgotten Clone Wars film.
Yes.
It wasn't him that voiced Count Dooku in the subsequent TV series, but when they were trying to launch the show by putting the pilot in cinemas, which was a mistake, and I think because it gave that film a level of expectation that it couldn't meet. Sure. But actually, if you kind of look at it outside of that context and just look at it as a 90-minute pilot for what was a very good animated show, it's actually pretty good. Okay. But yeah, Christopher Lee lends a credibility to that film, which is otherwise forgotten.
I'd like to see it for that reason. I really wanted to watch it for this podcast, but I wasn't able to find it.
I've never seen the Clone Wars either.
But yes, that's something that I'd like to look into. So our next question is, bringing us kind of smack up to date, how did you react to the CGI version of Cushing / Tarkin in Rogue One? Do you approve? Or do you think they could have done better? And once again, I'm going to give the first reaction to this to good old Tim.
I thought the CGI Tarkin in Rogue One was it was very ambitious. I don't know if the technology is there yet or if it will ever be there yet either. Although having said that, we've seen amazing things in visual effects, such as Captain America, where they made Chris Evans look really skinny, or in Ant-Man, where they made Michael Douglas look really young. I mean, you can do absolutely incredible things. And actually, the closest thing to Moff Tarkin that I can think of that really impressed me was Oliver Reed. His scenes that were unfilmed for Gladiator. They took a bunch of shots of him and they used compositing to create the illusion of him having shot these scenes, and that was amazing. And I thought that could have really worked here in Rogue One. I think when you've got nuances of performance and all those kind of things, I think it's such an impossible task to do all that with computer graphics. And I think they had the best technology, they had the best people to do the work. For me, it just didn't work. I did really love, though, that they included Peter Cushing as image in the film, and that they still have, they still hold it in high regard after all these years, and I thought that's great. So it's sort of this weird kind of catch-22 situation, I think, whereby the technology's not really there, but you have to have him in it. So it's one of those things.
How about you, Sean?
I actually really liked CGI Tarkin. I would agree it's overused. It was certainly ambitious, but I agree with Tim. We had the CGI Jeff Bridges in Tron that kind of was the start of developing this technology, and they've continued to push it in Rogue One. And I agree, they've done the absolute best they can with the technology at the time. And yeah, in a few years we might look back on it and it'll be dated, but right now I think it's particularly stunning and actually works better on the small screen. Now, if you've got the Blu-ray or the DVD, I think it works better because it's not on such a big screen and under such... you're not looking at it with as much detail, I suppose.
Sure.
You're not looking as closely. And I think what was really good, it was down to the lighting. I think the way they shot it was brilliant. And I know that they had a plan. If it didn't work, they were going to do something else. But they thought, well, let's see if it works. And I think it does work. And I think what Tim was saying about nuances of performance, a friend of mine, his kind of view on it is it looks great, but they've taken so much of that detail and they've looked so much at Peter Cushing's nuances and little facial tics that actually they put a bit too much in, and they do it a bit too much because they're trying too closely to do it. But I think it's great. I think it's important, not just from a practical standpoint, because this film directly leads into A New Hope. So if it had been a couple of years before, you could have got away with recasting. But this is literally 5 minutes before.
Yeah.
A New Hope. So it should be the same actor. And recognisably the same. I think Guy Henry does give a superb performance. I think his delivery is superb. I think he really captures what Cushing did without making it too much mimicry and too much of a kind of a pantomime. I think it's really great, and yeah, I liked it.
No, I was surprised how much he was in it. I mean, I thought he looked fine. First of all, I was really excited there was another Peter Cushing film in the cinema. That was exciting, and when they said they were going to do it, that was good. It was great to see him on the big screen again. You can tell it's CGI. It's got that slightly plasticky look and the slightly jerky movements, all CGI. But that technology will be refined, I'm sure, over the years. I think. I mean, Guy Henry's an actor I've always liked anyway. He's never been a big star, but he's cropped up in things. He's always been really good.
I think it's weird that we were talking about Guy Henry on this podcast a few months ago, and then the news came through that Guy Henry is actually playing Peter Cushing.
He does sound like it. Yeah, I think it works. I think he has to be in it simply for the sake of the narrative. He has to be in it because it leads into Star Wars, so he has to be there. I don't think you could recast it. It would be too confusing if you had a different actor playing Tarkin and then. So I thought it was great. And I think he would have been pleased with it as well. Yes. I think he would have been delighted to have been making films for.
I think we were saying earlier about how it's a shame they killed him, and he couldn't appear in the sequels. He said that himself.
Yeah.
But much like the second Indiana Jones film, if they had decided that the next Star Wars movie was set a year before rather than a year after, he could have been in it. And if it was this, I think he would have loved the role. I think that Tarkin's character has a better role, to be honest, in Rogue One than he did in Star Wars.
He does, and he steals the film from Krennic.
I have to say I agree with that. What you said before, I thought Krennic was a weak villain. I didn't like his performance.
Well, I like Ben Mendelsohn's performance, I liked him, but I think it's made by the interplay with him and Tarkin.
Yeah.
If it was just Krennic on his own as the main villain, I don't think he would have.
I think the problem that Krennic has is he is brilliant in that opening prologue. He has that real sense of menace. He's trying to be likable and nice, and just the way he delivers that line after Mads Mikkelsen says, "Oh, my wife's dead," and then he sees and goes, "Oh, look, Lyra's back from the dead. It's a miracle." And the way he just spits it out with such venom is great. But then the film jumps 10 years, where Krennic is now at the end of his career, being usurped by everyone, and Tarkin is stealing the limelight from him, that it actually then robs Krennic's
Sure.
villainy, because he doesn't then get to be this big villain that we'd been promised. And also, you know, I know a couple of people who've worked on these films, and I know that they had a lot of things. It was a difficult production. They were constantly having to reshape the narrative and how they were telling the story. So there was going to be less Tarkin, there was going to be more Tarkin, there's going to be less Krennic. Krennic was going to have a different story. So I think the film suffers in that regard. There are certain roles that and performances that suffer because of the way that production kept changing. And I know a friend as well who absolutely loved what they did with Tarkin, but it also completely took her out of the film because
I think
because you're too busy admiring it to just go with it.
I'd agree with that, but I don't think it spoiled the film for me. But I think I enjoyed those scenes in a different way than I enjoyed the rest of it.
Yes.
My sense about it was I loved that element of it, and I loved seeing Peter Cushing on the big screen. There were moments like "He'll may fire when ready" that I was like punching the air almost at other times, and I'm just amazed that that essentially he's the main villain of the film.
Yeah.
And I thought that was a lovely tribute. He gets that lovely credit at the end where it says Governor Tarkin, Guy Henry, but then it says the producers would like to acknowledge the work of Peter Cushing, OBE, and, you know, all heartwarming stuff. And it did make me think, I'm not too sure about the whole idea of kind of using CGI to resurrect dead actors, but I think if you do that with anyone, you should do it with Peter Cushing. I think
it's only ever justified in this context, I think. If I was to make a film now and I want to put Orson Welles in it, then that would be
just for the hell of
it. That would be wrong.
Yeah.
And I just remember that's what Sky Captain: The World of Tomorrow did, and that was
with Laurence Olivier. Yeah,
that was awful.
I didn't know about that.
But with Star Wars, it absolutely makes sense because Peter Cushing, I think, completely made Grand Moff Tarkin. From a narrative and a chronological point, it makes sense.
Yeah.
That's when it's justified, and that's when he used that technology because it's a storytelling choice. It's not a choice of we can, so we will.
But I think people will do. I think there will be, or people certainly would like to have new films with Humphrey Bogart and Marilyn Monroe and people like that. You know, I think the technology will improve over time.
Like the chocolate advert
with Audrey Hepburn. That's
Hepburn,
what I've been thinking of. And now, you know, there's a whole ethical thing. Would Audrey Hepburn have wanted to be in an advert for... She never did any adverts in that time, so would she want to be in an advert for chocolate?
Most of the productions that have resurrected deceased actors have been adverts for stuff, and that's...
I think Steve McQueen was
quite heinous. Yeah, he was. Which was actually directed by Peter Yates.
Oh, well.
So that was weird. But I don't know, maybe you would have said yes to it if Peter Yates was doing it, who knows. But, sorry, Sean, you look like you're about
I was about to say, but yeah, the biggest challenge that the Rogue One team had was there were no full body shots of Peter Cushing. They used a lot of reference material from A New Hope, but there are no full body shots of Peter Cushing because Peter Cushing did the whole film in his slippers.
His boots were too tight.
His boots were too tight. So I think it's kind of amazing what they were able to do with incomplete reference material as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'd just like to say this to kind of respond to a comment by another podcaster, Arnie, on the Now Playing podcast, who I'm pretty sure doesn't listen to our podcast, but he is one of the biggest Star Wars fans in the world, so maybe he'll find out about this episode, who knows. He didn't like the CGI Tarkin, and he was saying, look, 10 years ago, they cast another actor as Tarkin in Revenge of the Sith.
And then they just digitally altered his face a little bit.
Yeah, he was a guy called Wayne Pigram. Mm-hmm. Although I remember at the time there was photos of his digitally altered face and some rumours that it was actually Christopher Eccleston. It wasn't. So yes, I mean, because they brought Mon Mothma back from that film.
Yes, with a new actress. But also not a new actress. because she, the actress who played Mon Mothma in Rogue One, had also been cast
No.
as Mon Mothma in
episode 3. So they brought her back. So you were saying, why couldn't they bring the other guy back? But I think there's a difference between bringing back Genevieve O'Reilly playing a younger version of Caroline Blakiston, to having Wayne Pigram, who didn't even say a line, and I don't know what he's like as an actor, to suddenly being Peter Cushing 10 minutes before Star Wars. I think it still would have been a bit of a leap.
I think it's justified by the narrative. In Rogue One, it's justified by the narrative. You have to have Tarkin there because it leads on to Star Wars.
And it's justified to have a different actress as Mon Mothma because chronologically there's about 6 years between A New Hope and Return of the Jedi.
Yeah. In terms of could they have done it any better, I think I know that Rogue One had a very troubled production, that, as you said, the story was being shifted around all the time. I think they could have had a much simpler story, and they could have found a way to have Tarkin involved, but not as to the foreground. I think our friend Ross was saying he should have been like just a hologram that kept appearing, and then only turns up in person on the Death Star at the end, so you only have like 30 seconds where you see him interacting directly with other people. And I think, you know, the whole film could have been simplified in a lot of ways. I think there's too much going on, there's too many characters. I mean, my feeling about it is it could have been so much better, but that doesn't mean I didn't enjoy it. I was completely into it, even when I didn't really know what was happening, which is quite a lot of the time.
I don't know if I agree. I mean, yes, you absolutely could have had Tarkin in hologram through most of it, and that would have worked fine. It probably would have worked better for most people. But in terms of particularly that first scene with Krennic, and they're watching the laser being...
Oh, that was a great entrance and a great moment.
Great, and they could have just done it with his back to the window the whole time, but to actually have him turn around and have him interact, and I think you needed that, because for Krennic to have a storyline, you needed really to have him be directly interacting and be face to face, have his power be taken away from him.
That makes sense. I'm semi-convinced by that, and your comments are making me want to go back and watch the film again. So, so that's appropriate.
Well, what I haven't done yet is watch Rogue One and gone straight into A New Hope.
Right.
Largely because, as much as Star Wars is my favourite film, it's the film I've seen the least. Because I can't just watch Star Wars, I then have to put the other 3 on.
Right.
And God help me if I start with Phantom Menace, because then I have to watch all 6 of them. At least with Rogue One, I can kind of just watch it on my own.
It's a strange kind of standalone film, I suppose, with a bleak ending. I'm not just going back to that point earlier about whether would you like Star Wars more or less without Peter Cushing. And I said I would like it. I'd probably like it less, but at the same time, my favourite Star Wars film is The Empire Strikes Back. I know that's not a very controversial opinion, but that's the one that doesn't have Lee or Cushing in it. Those are not the guys that attract me to Star Wars. I'm attracted to Star Wars because it's a great adventure with great characters, and Darth Vader is a great villain. I think even though we're sad that Cushing disappears, Vader is wonderful as the villain in The Empire Strikes Back.
The Empire Strikes Back does have the Imperial March. It's one of the greatest pieces of film music ever written by anybody.
That is the shame of Dooku and Tarkin, is they don't really get their own musical themes. There's kind of a little... we were talking about John Williams' music earlier. There's a little motif for the Death Star, which kind of maybe also fits for Tarkin. Michael Giacchino certainly reuses it in that scene with... As Tarkin looks at the Death Star at the end of that scene in Rogue One where he's introduced, you actually hear the Death Star.
Is it that bit that goes...
Yes, it's how the scene ends.
Right, nice. Okay, and finally, I'd just like to say, is there anything else that we'd all like to say about these films that we haven't yet mentioned? And we'll start with Tim, because obviously he's not here, so he can't wax lyrical.
One of the other things about Cushing's involvement, which is kind of fun, and Dan and I have spoken about this before in the past, is that during the kind of 70s and 80s period when they were making these big Hollywood films in England, and I think mostly because of economic reasons, you know, you had your Superman, your Batman, your Star Wars, your Indiana Jones, all these films. They kind of, even though they were American films and they were shot here, they downplayed the English involvement in terms of the cast. And when you look at The Force Awakens now, this, you know, the latest one, you've got the two main characters, John Boyega and Daisy Ridley, and Daisy Ridley's got her English accent, but she's doing this kind of gee whiz kind of American character, and you've got John Boyega who's doing a total American accent, and they did the reverse back then. They'd have, you know, your Carrie Fisher, your Mark Hamill, and Harrison Ford. They'd be your up front and centre. They'd be your principal characters, and then for the support parts, for the sagely wizard type and these kind of, you know, the big pantomime villain. You've got your Cushing, but because it's in an alien universe, you have some flexibility with that. But they kind of play these older archetypes that are in the background. You know, and in Superman you had Krypton. You know, they got around it with Krypton, so they made all the Kryptonian actors English. So it's you know, they become like aliens. And in Return to Oz as well, they had Jean Marsh and they had Nicole Williamson who were doing their Gnome King and Princess Mombi, and those characters. You know, they kind of moved between. You know, they had very English theatrical accents when they were the villains. They're playing dual roles in those films, and so yeah, they'd play around that. But then you'd have all of these kind of American actors who were based in England. You had your Shane Rimmers, John Ratzenberger, William Hootkins. These kind of performers, and they'd, you know, they were I guess they were English citizens, so they got to, you know, they kind of helped this. I think it was a rule that the English Actors Union had, where you had to have a certain quota of English actors. Of course, now it's changed. Now you've got things like Gary Oldman playing Commissioner Gordon in the Batman films, and and they've and as I said, with the Star Wars films, you've got those English characters kind of up front. But yeah, it was kind of a different world back then, where they, you know, they downplayed that, and so yeah, it was fun with Guinness, that he's this sage-like wizard, and you know, Cushing is this, you know, this big sort of fascist bureaucrat type, and I thought that was, you know, it was fun that they positioned you know, those kind of bigger actors in those parts. And as I said, those two, you know, Cushing and Guinness, they were the biggest stars of Star Wars at that time, before the three cast members became the huge stars that kind of sold the movies and became big names elsewhere.
Sean, have you got anything you'd like to say that you haven't covered?
No, all I know now is that I had lots I wanted to get done tonight, and I feel like I'm going to end up just watching Star Wars instead.
Right. Well, I'm sorry about that, fella. But
it's a burden that I think I'll live with.
Right. How about you, Howard?
Star Wars was the film that introduced me to the whole exciting world of cinema. It was the first time I went to the cinema. Yeah. It was so exciting. And it introduced, I think, most of my friends who were the same age as me, an entire generation to go to the cinema, to get into the, you know, and it was so exciting. And it reminds me of lots of happy times in my life. It's a happy film. It's a great film. It's a great piece of entertainment. And I'm really say, who was it hated Star Wars, did you say?
My mum.
I don't know how anybody can hate it. It's such a feel-good film. It's so exciting, and it's so, you know, life-affirming.
I mean, I love it, but because of my mum's perspective, I can sort of see being annoyed by it. And there was an interview with John Sessions a few years ago where he said that he doesn't like Star Wars. And he said, well, it just sounded just like my mum. He said, somebody please explain to me the point of Star Wars. It's like watching endless kitchen units exploding. You know, and I could sort of see that in a way.
I think my mum is generally indifferent to Star Wars, but I don't know if she's a massive fan of the music, largely because that's all she would hear from my bedroom, or just from me humming for the last 20 years. Even after I moved out, I think she can just still hear it echoing around the house.
Well, Star Wars is the only film I've ever seen with my mum in the cinema. She came along that first time, and she liked it. She's by no means a science fiction enthusiast, but she enjoyed it. She thought, and she loved that scene as well at the beginning. She said, I'll never forget that scene where the big spaceship comes. Yeah, so I think it's a great film.
It's great fun, great imagination, and
it deserves all the popularity and all the adulation it's had over these last 40 years.
Although I'm afraid that we're going to reach saturation point now that they're making them again and it's everywhere again. I'm still sort of glad that they are making them again. I want to keep going back to those worlds, and I guess I am going to be doing every Christmas until I die. So. All right, guys, thank you very much. That was a lovely discussion.
Yes, thank you, Sean,
No,
for being
it's
our
no.
special guest.
Thank you, Sean.
No,
You've been a
I'll
Do
wonderful
come
guest.
again.
I'm
And in
always
fact-
happy to talk about Star Wars.
And in fact, I think we could probably explain that you're not only our guest but our host, because we're in your house. So thank you very much
Yes.
for having us.
Yeah, you're more than welcome.
And come back soon.
Yes.
No, you'll have to come back.
Thank you,
Yeah.
fellas.